Hello and welcome to the Giant Pod with me, host Andy Wrintmore. My guest this week is Rachel Haughey. She is a production manager extraordinaire across the global music and live events industry. She's also the head of YPN, which is the Youth Production Network. We talk about booking her perfect summer of festivals and gigs to work at. We talk about her start in the underground rave and house scene, touring and putting on events way before events management and production managers and things like that were officially titles within the music industry. We talk about her place as a woman within the music industry and women's place within the music industry and the live events industry. We talk about her work on the legendary Led Zeppelin reunion that happened 2007. The first inception of the Youth Production Network, pulling together crews of youth from the Soweto township in South Africa to pull off a live sporting event live stream. We talk about our experiences together. As I've said before, I have a lot of love and respect and admiration for Rachel. The things that she talks about within this podcast, the challenges, technical and social challenges to pull off the things that she's pulled off in her life it's just absolutely extraordinary. There are mountains that I feel she's had to move to do the things that she's done, and she doesn't seem to even blink in the face of them. Many people would cower away and never achieve these things, but she just seems to just get things done and have an awful lot of time and respect for that. So here it is. It's a great chat. It's me, Andy Wrintmore, Rachel Haughey, The Giant Pod. Have fun. Here it is. Bit of sharpness. It's all good.
Yeah, nice. Round it up a little bit.
Yes. So we've just done a bit about politics and whatnot, but let's get into why you're here. Let's talk about your crazy life and career. I will say career up until some of the career up until last year. But there's obviously you've got new irons in the fire now, I suspect you always have a few in the fire, don't you? So where does it begin for you?
Well, I guess, people always say to me, how did you get to do what you do? You know, that classic question. And to be honest, it's an extremely long story, because it's really, it's just really the journey of your life, really. And I'd say the short answer is that I've always just followed my gut and essentially kind of followed my heart, really. I mean, I grew up in a not a very wealthy family in any way. We were sort of had very minimal resources growing up, and I was also the oldest of 6 kids. So from very young age, I was responsible and looking after crew, so to speak. And I always say this is why I was that's really my training of why I'm a production manager now. Yeah. Was that early the family upbringing, really. And when I was very independent for a very young age, I was living independently from when I was about 16, really. And, was studying, but at the same time, going to festivals, loved festivals, from really young. And I guess my first job at festivals was working for Lulu's Cafe, which is why I'm actually living here in Frome, to be honest, because it was the original festival family, serving chips in the cafe. And I suppose that was where my, first connection with any kind of production crew or anything like that was through the festivals, really. And also I'm 46 now, and I'm really the last generation. I'm in the crossover generation that is old enough to remember what it was like before the internet, but was young enough still when the internet came in, that we also had, youth with the internet, as well. Yeah. And so that precious time that we had, which I'm still very proud to be part of when I was in my late teens, very early 20s, was fully offline. We all were. it was the era of it was the free rave and the party era, and all of the, no one could ever find us. We were just off. You could literally drive off in a van into the countryside somewhere with a, PA in the back, a couple of bass bins, and just go for it, And that really was our history, our upbringing. We came from a culture of, everyone would go out, they would be led completely by passionate. No one had any money, it wasn't money driven at all. It was total passion for being together, for the music, And there was that sense of everyone just used to bring something, whatever it was, all sorts of tap really together. And together we'd make this space, make the sound system, make the gathering, the basic lighting and stuff like that. And really that was our roots of making stuff out of nothing, and the sense of, because I didn't know what the word production was for years, to be honest. It wasn't even on my radar. It was always that sense of bringing everyone together and creating something together that I really connected with.
So you were all production managers before you knew that was even a thing, really? Yeah.
It's where they all came from. It's where all of the original technical design for lighting, for show effects, for sound systems came from those early days, because we were making stuff up. We were literally making it up out of bits of stuff out of the garage or, from wherever. We were really hanging around. It was around sound systems, because even the venues weren't really there. And club nights, even at that point, that wasn't really our focus. It was around sound systems. So if you were with a crew that was connected to a sound system, so wherever the sound system was, that's where you'd go and set up, or you were part of that, gig or that rave or whatever.
Sounds very, it's very DIY punk rock in a way.
Totally.
It's just the other side of the coin, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Do you think there's something? Do you think it's the magic of youth that does that? It's definitely something about being young and carefree that produces community and projects and adventure like that, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's what's, really driven my support of youth communities all over the world, really, because although you could say it was also to do with specifically our time, exactly what we had available then and what was going on in the world as well. We were literally developing dance music, house music around that time, But it's the underground, as I call it. It's the youth underground. Yeah. Every single generation has an underground, and will always do, way into the future and happened way into the past as well. Stuff that the grown-ups don't know about, where they don't know where you are, and language, with all sorts of the stuff that the grown-ups don't know about, that's driven by that passion and naivety in a, with all, saying in a nice way, but that great naivety that you have when you're much younger. Yeah. Fearlessness.
That's, people listening right now can't see the massive grin on my face that whole little speech just gave me. It's just when you said, and we'll always be an underground. Do you know what I mean? I was like, yes. I love it so much. Do you think that the hedonism and the escape of these raves, of the house music, of this scene that you were in, do you think this is something you were drawn to because growing up you had so much responsibility? And I'm not trying to say your childhood was stolen or something like that. That's not what I'm getting at. You may think it was, I don't know, but that's not what I'm saying. But an element of, okay, I've done my duties now, I've done my responsibilities, and here is this sort of like carnival or crew of people, this little band that I can join, and I can just let loose a little bit and just experience some youth before adulthood comes knocking. Because it's fair to say you've raised some kids there, didn't you? So
in a sense, yes, absolutely. And definitely I think partly that would have influenced it, and the sense of breaking free, so to speak.
Yeah.
Mixed in with being a teenager, and that natural thing that every generation has of wanting to break free and bust on out, And we were basically, we really were the kids that ran away to join the circus, know. Anyone that was connected with bands or performances or gigs or anything like that, literally we were like considered like the filthy gypsies of the generation. It was like no grown-ups possibly understood what the hell it was we were doing, and you'd have the sort of go and get a proper job type echoing in your ears around that, and people didn't even understand the lifestyle. Which, and I guess they were right. We did live under hedges at that point.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, it's been that sense of, freedom. But I also do think that's connected to the youth underground that is born of every single generation. And of course, that will look different depending on what, the world is, the technology that's around and all of that. But I think that feeling always is there.
Yeah. I mean, I was very much the same. As soon as I found out that, if you got good enough at playing drums or something that you liked, like a guitar or whatever, if you were good enough, you could go and get in a van with your best mates and you didn't have to do any of this real world stuff. You could, and at 16, you could go literally, like you said, join the circus. You could go out, not come back for 6 months. I mean, I was more than willing to do that at 15 or whatever. I was like, take me away, let's go now.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to miss anybody. And I still feel that to a degree. I do still feel that. I mean, last year in 2020, there's no gigs, no touring, no nothing, double negative there. There were moments especially in the summer where it was just because I've just been so used to spending time in the summer in Europe, seeing new places with your best mates, doing this, crafting this thing that you're doing and having the best time. And there was moments in the summer where I was just like, get me out of here. I have wanderlust.
Yeah.
I have to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
absolutely. That sense of movement. And also because that really lent to a life of traveling. I've traveled the world now, when I sat here in my office and you can't quite see it from there, but I've got a big map on the wall that I've pretty much looked at every day for about the last 10 years since I've been sat in this office. But I've travelled all over the world, and really I guess it's come from that original, that sense of freedom, that sense of moving, and also that sense of finding family as well in your crew. That sense of you can set up anywhere. It can be the back of a van, it can be under stage, it can be in a tree somewhere, under bush or anywhere. But that sense of, when you build a crew fire and you're around a crew fire, you can find that sense of home wherever you are in the world, and that sense of belonging, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess that the definition of home in that regard is within your comrades and also within your role that you carve out. And this is another thing as well, is people, it's tribalism. We're looking for that place in the world where, and everyone wants it, whether we find it or not, it is a different matter, but everyone wants to be the person that does that thing and does that thing really well and can't be replaced in that thing and is loved and respected and admired for doing that thing. I think that's such a basic human thing. And that's part of why I loved the idea about being in a band is, you have your thing that you do, that you bring to the table. And if you do it well and you bring enough creativity or whatever, then, that becomes your thing and you know who you are then. And I guess that's part of it as well. When you're a teenager, you don't know who you are. You're trying to figure out who you are and where your place is. And so, I totally feel that vibe. It's the same rock and roll, house music, raves, whatever. Like they're the same. It's all the same thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's the same. Exactly. It's all born from the same roots, really.
Yeah.
And it's that same culture that was then very much connected to the traveling culture. Because imagine when I was in my late teens, very early 20s, on the cusp of the internet coming out, when you went traveling in those days, I mean, you literally went. That was it.
Yeah.
No one heard from you for months.
Yeah.
And you were like, there was no way of getting hold of you. That was literally it. And the most you would have is, you'd have these like post box places in cities where you'd like rent a little box, and someone it was like a PO box, like an old school version of a PO box.
Right.
And people could send letters to you, to like whatever city it was, wherever the country was. And there'd always be that excitement of when you'd been off, wherever it was you'd been around, and you'd go back through the city and see if you had any post waiting for you,
That's great. And I guess
that was the only way. So
Yeah.
it was it really was when we went out, even if you were at home or going out with a crew of your mates to go and set up a rave somewhere or, whatever, you really were fully off grid wherever you were. So all of those original people who ran those crews, people like my very good friend Susie Carlino, for example, she's same age as me. She used to be part of Spiral Tribe, hanging around. And she used to be the one to say, "Hey, Susie, can you make it look good?" She'd have a bit of old sheet and something or other, light or whatever, hung in the trees, And she's since now run her company, Creative Draping, for 20 years now, and that was from being in the back of a huge, big, places that with no money of making it look good and setting out for raves and stuff. So all those people that started in those crews then naturally became part of the festivals. Lost Vagueness was a classic one, which then became Shangri-La at Glastonbury Festival, which you'll know very well.
Yeah.
That whole Shangri-La area. They were a free party crew originally, before it was the Lost Vagueness crew, that used to park up outside the fence in Glastonbury every year. And they just sat up in a random field up there and had their own thing going on. And as the fences came in and the rules and all the rest of it came in, basically Michael Eavis loved them, because it was always a great setup, but purely illegal, completely outside. But he loved it so much, he was like, guys, here's a budget, here's a field, do a thing. And that's how that whole area, opened up.
And now Shangri-La is probably one, other than the pyramid stage, is one of the most iconic parts of the festival.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine a Glastonbury without the conversation of, all right, which night are we going to Shangri-La? Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know, because if we don't go tonight, you'll be queuing outside of it until 5 a.m. And we've done that. We've got caught in that, knowing that we've got a shift the next morning and that we've got to deal with pissing, moaning volunteers or whatever the next day. Can't handle their substances. And you get caught in Shangri-La queue. That's it. You're done. You know what kind of mood you're going to be in the morning.
That's right.
It's fantastic. I was going to ask you actually how you transition from this grassroots DIY, and like naive. There's a naivety, isn't it? Because you don't know at this point that you're sowing the seeds for something that's going to become a very legitimate, important part of mainstream live music culture. So, at what point does that morph into the moment where you go, "This is actually my career now. This is what I do. This is a role that we've created roles for ourselves."
Or my very first club gig was working with a couple of mates who were DJs, and I was like the promoter. It's like three of us. And a classic thing, because I grew up in London, when I, through this time, and was that you'd have no money yourself, but you go and speak to a pub, like a local pub, and say, "Listen, can I put a night on? You take the bar, it's obviously great for them, and we'll take the door." And that's how we started our first venues, really, of having any kind of like, and we'd have DJs, and you just invite all your mates. You'd have some sort of back room or a dance floor or some sort of area within the pub that would be your kind of club space, if you like. And obviously it worked well for the pubs because it brought extra people in. and, you know, give them a good bar at the weekends. And it was a way of putting on nights with no money, you know. So started doing that. And I lived in South London for about 10, 15 years, in fact, a whole period of time where there was a huge era of all of these different pub gigs popped up. Really, I obviously was aware more of the ones around South London, so around Brixton, up Brixton Hill, it's sort of into Streatham, but really Brixton Hill was a big sort of melting pot for a number of these. And we'd all gig. All of us would know each other. It was like a circuit, really, of different bands and DJs. And that really was a huge, it was almost like a huge sort of, community, really, from which many very, very well-known people came. So there's loads of people like Basement Jacks, for example. So Simon and Felix that run Basement Jacks, they ran a night called Rooty. They were all part of the same bands. All of us were playing in, all nights that were going on. Maxi Jazz is another one. Sunday Best and Bestival, Rob DeBank, for example, and his original Sunday Best sessions, which used to be at the Tea Rooms des Artistes in Clapham, every Sunday, the graveyard shift on a Sunday once you've been out for 3 or 4 days. And, you sort of end up chilling out there. But they were like literally communities actually that grew. So that was the transition from going, to a rave or starting a little club night to then naturally being part of these communities that were then running these festivals. And through the festivals went on for a while. And I remember there was a point where it was like they were in decline, actually, at one point when I was really getting into them. And I just did them because I loved them, So I just, it was just my crew, my friends, and what I loved doing. And I remember thinking, am I going a bit mad here? Am I getting into something that's literally on its way out?
Right.
It really was. There was nothing there. And then I would say in maybe like the noughties, around the millennium time, maybe slightly earlier, around that time is where you then got the first brands that actually experiential marketing became a thing. And the very first brands, and you had the original ones like the Strongbow Rooms, for example, or Orange, the phone people were one of the earliest ones where they would sponsor an area, a backstage area, and give loads of free. Originally, we were like, yeah, they're amazing. You get loads of free stuff,
Yeah.
like drinks and bags and, or the Dr. Martens tent or whatever, and you get free Dr. Martens and that was the evolution into the festivals that people know now, where it effectively became commercialized over that time. And then that's where, the sponsored events, and the communities, I guess, changed. And sadly, a lot of those original grassroots, early communities then actually got bought out, along the way, like Festival, for example, or not Festival, like the Big Chill is a good example of that.
I always just assumed that they were someone saying, okay, Glastonbury makes a lot of money, let's do our own. But it was far more organic and pure than that.
That's right. All of the original, in fact, all of the festivals came from that organic roots, way, that background like that. All of them did. And it was only later as, there was the idea of this commercialization of the festivals that then it morphed into something different.
Right.
And, and you still see examples of the very, we all know tiny, up until last year, obviously, very tiny, weeny festivals that you might know that still are, very, very small ones that are just still in a couple of fields somewhere or something. And still at that point where virtually everybody knows everybody at that festival, because it has started from a group of friends, actually, and a little crew that have just invited their friends and their friends and their friends, so to speak. So that's the original history of festivals, which lots of the youth crew now don't understand that background, of how we got to where we are.
Yeah. It's always wild every year when we're showing, or you're showing, a new batch of volunteers around the festival. I remember one year specifically, we went to a couple of the big stages at Glastonbury, and you were like, "Oh, this is so and so. He's the stage manager or whatever." And then they're like, "All right, Andy," and I'm like, "Bloody hell!" Like, it's strange how, because Frome is just so full of, this town is just so full of people in that industry. But it was just, I was so, like, you knew everyone, and then I ended up but I didn't know them through industry stuff. I just knew them from my day job and being in Frome. But it was crazy how small the world is. It's like, it's pretty mad. So, okay, so because we've got so much to talk about. You've done that whole grassrootsy thing, and at some point you plan yourself a perfect summer. And I want to touch on this perfect summer story that you told me a year or two ago. Maybe more than that. Tell me about this perfect summer that you planned out, because it sounds like quite an epic thing. And then I want to get into your arena work and Led Zeppelin.
So what I did is basically I looked on. We did have there was a site still now called eFestivals, which had just started, which is like a sort of a directory of all the different festivals that happened. You could look up different bands when they were playing at venues, stuff like that. And I literally put together, if you could plan your dream summer and literally start in, which for us obviously runs from May to September, roughly, for the season. And, if you had no holds barred and you could work on whatever you wanted, what would be your dream summer? And I would plan it, but based on real gigs. So not just a big fantasy thing, but real stuff that was going on. So I'd research it. So it might be, going from a certain festival straight to another one that wasn't happening. Or it could be including, if there was, favourite artists that were playing at an arena show somewhere or something, be like working on that. And I'd literally put together that list of all those dates across the summer, just think, oh my God, imagine if you worked on all of that together. It'd be like the dream summer. And I literally put my CV together and I sent it off to all of them. Why not? And that's where I started. And in fact, at that point, even though I had been to Glastonbury through the cafe work before, I didn't know any of the Glastonbury production people, or the people up at the farm or anything like that. And I literally, that summer, one of my things was Glastonbury Festival, it was part of my dream summer. And I sent my CV literally to info@glastonburyfestivals.co.uk. I was thinking, most of them were infos out. I didn't know anybody, really. And I literally sent it to that thinking, wow, it's going to end up under a hedge somewhere or in a bin or something like that. No one's ever going to look at it. But lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I got a call out of the blue saying, hey, we're looking for someone. Can you come and work on site for 4 weeks in a caravan? And, within about 10 seconds, I was there, packed, ready to go. Yeah. And so that's how I started to build my, to build my year, I guess, and started to connect with the bands, the festivals, and, the different crews that I wanted to work with.
And I guess from there, you do 4 weeks at Glastonbury, maybe you've done a week or so prior somewhere else, and then you go down the road, and maybe towards the end of the summer, you're at a different festival, and you go, oh, what's up? And you start to see how small this world is, and you start to see the same volunteers, the same production crews, the same bands, the same roadies, and
same market traders, market traders, the crew staff, the fencing crew, exactly, same big tops,
right? Yeah,
same stages.
And so from that, you develop a network and a reputation,
that's right.
And then people go, oh, I need one person to do this, and then they go, oh, they get Rachel. She was a good hang. Because a lot of it's going to be hangability as well, and being cool
100%.
And being cool under pressure. And you'll get the job, because a lot of these people just want cool people around, don't they? Mostly, and then worry about things after it.
You can say, I still say that now. obviously it's fantastic to know certain, have certain technical skills and know how to operate certain desks or, whatever it is from there. But the most important thing still now is actually the person themselves. So it's the character of who you are. And especially when you're working in live events and when you're talking about festivals, arena shows or anything like that, it's hard work. Do you know what I mean? And you're going to go through every emotion in the book, the whole range from pure, amazing, oh my God, lifetime, side of stage moment, ecstasy, never forget, to absolute despair and pure tiredness and frustration, and anger and all of the rest of it.
Oh, I know.
So, and when we all know this one, right? And so it's the people that you work with, and it's the person who's, like yourself, Andy, where we've all been stuck with things, gritty work at certain points, that just needs to be done because the whole point is that the show must go on. And without getting the boxes loaded in time into the back of the truck, that can't load out properly. And then it can't, to allow the next band to load in on time or to do all that washing up, backstage of how important that washing up is, because you're literally fueling the people who are fueling the artists to make the show, So, yeah.
So I want to fast forward. So you end up doing a bunch of arena shows, and that, I guess, in the off season of the festival stuff, you do arenas. You're in charge of 200 or 300 crew at a time, and that is something you've developed through years of paying your dues in the underground, and then in the newly legitimate established festival world, let's say. You mentioned Led Zeppelin to me the other night when we were having a little catch up. Tell me about Led Zeppelin.
So, well, along my way of, like I say, working for, different crews and things like that, I met an amazing girl who still to this day opens so many doors for me, called Jo Little, absolute warrior queen, as I call her. And she was out, there was so few of us girls, on site anywhere that we all knew each other by name. There's literally about 5 or 6 across the whole industry or something. She had a call when I was with her from someone who said, hey, we're looking for a production assistant for this for some project. And she said, well, I'm sat next to a girl, right here, who's amazing. And, I'm putting her forward, for this. And put the phone down. And she said, that basically there's a friend of mine called Jim Baggett, who is probably one of the best production managers in the world, which I didn't know at the time. Her friend who was looking for a production assistant. And I said, well, what's the project? And she said, oh, I've got no idea. But it doesn't matter. Whatever it is he's working on, it's always amazing. Like, just go and see. I went into town. I was supposed to go to this office and, just off Oxford Street somewhere for this sort of interview, whatever, with him, to meet him. And long story short, found myself in a room with him and Harvey Goldsmith. And basically...
the big fish.
That's right.
The biggest fish.
Yeah. And turned out that the job that he needed the production assistant for, which was working with Jim, was... at that time, it was the biggest marketing experiential show that ever happened in history. And it was the Nokia New Year's Eve project. So it was 5 countries, 5 huge gigs in 5 different countries, all at the same time. And this is 2006 at this point, 2006 into 2007 New Year's Eve. So you see how long ago it was. And it was a huge live streamed thing. And they needed an assistant for Jim. So I ended up working on that with him, and then worked with him on, it was through working with him and Harvey Goldsmith that I then worked on, I was lucky enough to work on some really iconic gigs, including Pavarotti in the deserts in the middle of Petra in Jordan, with a huge 75-piece orchestra in the middle of a Bedouin camp, And one of the gigs and the World Cup kickoff concert in South Africa, in 2010, just before that, one of the gigs was Led Zeppelin. So it wasn't Led Zeppelin. It was actually a tribute concert to Ahmet Ertegun.
Right.
Of Atlantic Records, who'd passed away. And it was a big tribute concert at the O2. There was two halves to the concert, and they had, essentially, it was like everybody else. I mean, imagine the range of musicians was just
staggering.
Phenomenal. I mean, absolutely, from Benny King to just Bill Wyman, and it just went on and on and on, all these artists. So they were all squished into the first half. And then there was an interval, and basically the second half was a one-off reunion of Led Zeppelin. So, of course, everyone was just calling it the Led Zeppelin show.
Yeah, because it was.
Yeah. So we worked with them, and in a nutshell, we had to set up there was 2 weeks rehearsals. So we had 1 week, which was just pure technical rehearsals. And we had it was almost like 100-meter stealth screen. I mean, it was enormous, this huge technical stealth screen setup that we used on there. And this great big technical rehearsal that needed to happen. And then the second week, the band joined in. So it was like the live band rehearsals in, the rehearsal. So we've set everything up, and, we're supposed to be in Elstree Film Studios to do this, in the big Studio One, massive, great big, space, considering it's an arena show setup that you're doing and all that. And we got everything organised, and I'm working with Jim. We've booked it all in and everything. And then suddenly Jim gets this call a few days before we're about to start all of this, and just sort of goes, hello, stop worry, sorry, pardon? And it turned out that Jimmy Page had broken his little finger. And so we had to cancel everything and change it all. Luckily, it was actually only 2 or 3 weeks later. It wasn't luckily it was all right. So 2 or 3 weeks later. So what it meant was the first week we could stay in Elstree in this massive place.
Yeah.
But the second week, the only place we could find that was even available at that time was Shepperton Studios, which is a way smaller, tiny, compared to the set we were fitting in. But we had no choice, so we just had to do that. So we basically squeezed this huge arena set into this relatively small studio room. So it was intense. It was like laser shows in there, and this huge LED screen, and just all of it going on in there. And that's where Led Zeppelin joined us. And so we had the band in every day.
Oh, my God.
And we were playing. And on the Wednesday, so the big O2 gig was on I think a Saturday, or was it a Sunday? It was at the weekend. But the Wednesday before was actually the most iconic night that all of us talk about that were working on that gig, even more than the gig itself.
Right.
Because it was the full band run through. It was going to be a top to bottom. As we were going to perform
It's your personal private
everybody
gig.
Playing, right? And so I was made sure I'd done everything I need to do, because it's like, I am going to be in there. There's nowhere else I'm going to be. We had all the security, everything locked down and all the rest of it, because it was all, undercover. We weren't allowed to tell anybody where we were and all this stuff. And they started the dress rehearsal. And there was 30 of us in that room, in that small studio. I'll never forget it in my life, and it was the full dress rehearsal. So it was literally the lasers, it was everything there.
Yeah.
With just 30 of us together. And I always remember, Jimmy Page about 6 or 7 feet in front of me, literally playing Stairway to Heaven with his violin bow on his guitar in a laser triangle.
Right.
And just unbelievable. And there was literally fans trying to get in, because they could hear it, obviously. The word had spread. And they had literally fans holding their phones at the end of the drain pipes trying to record it and stuff like that.
I'd be doing that.
Yeah. And then we went to, and then of course, we had the setup at the O2. And, the night was, it was an unforgettable night, because every single seat, literally up to the rafters, was full of somebody famous. Yeah. Like every single seat. There was no VIP because the entire place was VIP, basically.
Yeah.
And I had my little digital camera at that point. So I've got my footage that I shot from the front of house, in that gig. And I'm going to be honest, because I had to end up doing the final clean-up, as the production assistant always does after everyone's left, and you've got to clean out the rest of the office and stuff, is that I actually still have one of the stage banners up in my attic.
What's on the stage banner?
It's the Armoured Ertegun tribute concert.
Right.
Stage scrims that they had for that gig, and there was one of them left, so...
People listen to this, right? That's brilliant. Let's talk about let's get into the meat of let's get into how the reason that we met is because you have set up a thing called the Youth Production Network, which is a global initiative, 10 years in the making now. It has opened the doors for me personally to many, many great experiences, and obviously skills and opportunities for others who I'm still friends with now, which is a really cool thing.
Nice.
But because I know the story, the inception of the Youth Production Network is utterly remarkable. It's so rock and roll. It's almost beyond rock and roll. It's sort of god tier, demigod, deity levels of production management. Just run us through that fateful sort of week. I guess it was a week. Was it a weekend?
It was it was supposed to be a 10-day build. So it was with Harvey Goldsmith and Jim Baggott. So this is, following, it was within a couple of years after the Led Zeppelin and all those big shows. And we were called in as part of the international team that went over to South Africa to basically help produce and direct the South African World Cup Kickoff concert, which happened in 2010. And basically, it was a very special one-off concert that was put in place to mark the occasion it was the first time that the World Cup had ever been in South Africa, and it was specifically because of Nelson Mandela. So after Nelson Mandela had, been released and was then president, from his experience in 1995, where he basically famously supported the Springboks and got behind the rugby in South Africa, and the Springboks then went and won, the rugby, World Cup, which helped to bring the country together after all of those years of apartheid. And essentially that was his, that was his thing. He saw the power of sport and of music to unite people. And so he put out for the bid, essentially, and effectively brought the World Cup for the first time in South Africa. First time in Africa, full stop, actually. So you had all the, opening and closing ceremonies and all the normal stuff you have around a World Cup. But this World Cup kickoff concert was set very specifically in place to honour Nelson Mandela and to mark this moment. And it was specifically chosen to be in Soweto Township, purposefully, in the big stadium there. Well, it's about, I think, 40,000 capacity stadium there called Orlando Stadium, which is in Soweto Township in Johannesburg in South Africa. We were called over to work with the on-the-ground production teams there and to basically oversee and and essentially deliver this concert, to put it on. So we had a massive international lineup, including, Alicia Keys, the Black Eyed Peas, the list just went on and on and on. And we also had a huge lineup of African artists, Hugh Masekela, Angelique Kidjo. It just went on and on, all of different bands. And out of this huge lineup, for 3 hours of that, we were going live, i.e. we were going live broadcast. It was being broadcast live as it happened out to 1 billion people around the world. So that was the gig. And of course, there'd never been anything in Orlando Stadium before, anything like that, of that scale of event with the broadcast, setups and all the rest of it. So we land in South Africa and very quickly we're told that our 10-day build, because it was a huge, imagine a massive build there to do that was cut to 5 days last minute in a long story cut short. And so even as we'd landed and I'd gone down to site, my job, well, Jim Baggott was the main show director, so he was managing all the stage. Yeah, stuff around the stage, you could sum it up by. And I was there as his site assistant, so my job was to manage all of the backstage areas and everything supporting the stage, effectively. So setting up hundreds of dressing rooms, media areas, all of that, but also, running the production office, which then support all of the site builds, that support everything really, and the show team as well, the technical team and the callers. So we land in, and as soon as I'd realised they hadn't given me nearly enough crew, not nearly enough, even to do it in 10 days,
Right.
And then it was cut to 5, and I was like, oh my God, we've got this huge global broadcast going live to 1 billion people in 5 days, virtually, or it was 6 or 7 days at that point. I need help, and I got the answer, the usual expected answer saying, well, we've got no more budget,
So you expected to work a miracle?
That's right. It's like literally me and one person or something to set up a four floored arena backstage show with hundreds. I mean, it just was never going to work, at all. So I said, well, this is the World Cup in South Africa for the first time. And I'm stood here looking out to Soweto around me. There must be thousands of young people living right here, literally up the road, that could just walk here. And, lots of the jobs that I need help with, they're not rocket science, it's setting up furniture, putting signage up, all sorts of different, crew support. So as long as someone is there with a good head on their shoulders and they're dedicated and they can follow guidance exactly, that's all we need, so I can train them. In short, we took on about 40 young people from Soweto Township and surrounding townships as work experience and brought them on site. And I essentially had trained a whole crew, split lots of them into different teams. So we had different teams working with different departments from sound, lighting, stage, etc. And I had a whole team of about 15 crew who I trained to run the production office. 2 or 3 days, I have to say, first day or two, I was just like, what have I done? I was like, oh my God, I'm not sure this is going to work. But then on some way, from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, you couldn't put your finger on it, but something happened on the 3rd day. It's like everybody just got it. You could just feel it. When you walked into the production office, it was like everyone was just on it and supporting everything. And in a nutshell, without those 40 crew, which were made up of a whole number of young people who'd had either very little event experience or no experience whatsoever, and certainly any young person from anywhere in the world would never have had experience on that level of production. It would be very rare to find that anyway. Essentially, without those guys, that whole concert wouldn't have happened. And they were the complete backbone to that, supporting that huge gig that went on. And lots of people don't realise that, when they watch that show back, when you're watching Shakira performing and all of that, that none of that would have happened without having that backbone crew behind there. There was also another young crew of trainee photographers and filmmakers that also came to site. And so I managed to arrange to have media passes, full access media passes for them. They were a small crew from Soweto. And so they were able to get into the photographer's pit with all the big international press, shooting Alicia Keys and the Black Eyed Peas and everyone, got in there.
Lenses like telescopes.
That's right, massive. So they went in as they experienced it as jobbing photojournalists in the thick of it all,
Yeah.
And the next day, so, the gig was obviously phenomenal. We managed to pull it all off. And I remember one of the crew saying to me, as we're all sat there, the audience have left and we're all having drinks, the production office and stuff, and saying, well, obviously this was all amazing, working with the big artists and everything, but said that the most amazing thing is that this is the first time that we felt equal on a site together. And that is the most amazing thing that we all, that's been phenomenal about this, that we're, as you know, the way I teach, we may have different jobs, but we are all equal. We're all needed to make the whole clockwork run, so to speak. The next day I got this call, and obviously I'm horribly hungover and extremely tired beyond belief, having just done all that. But I got this call quite early the next day, inviting me to join this little photographer and filmmaker crew on a film shoot they were doing in one of the kids that were part of the trainee crew where they lived in another township. And so I somehow got myself together and managed to get to go down and join them and went into Deep Sleep Township for 5 hours the next day with them.
Right.
And right into the heart of the township, and we were walking around. They were doing, photography training and stuff like that. And I just had the most phenomenal. It's the first time I've been in a township in my life.
Yeah. Now explain to anyone that may not understand what you mean by a township. What does this township look like? Because I know we've talked about this place a couple of times, and we did recently, and it seems like it's a culture shock, isn't it?
Well, that's right. People call it different names around the world. You could call them slums in India, or favelas in Brazil, or townships in South Africa. It's essentially, most of them actually commonly were formed when there were all sorts of workers historically, for mines. Well, in South Africa's case, it was the mining communities historically, where all these people came to looking for work, and there was nowhere to live. And so essentially they built they were like huts and shanty towns made up of corrugated iron and, all sorts of whatever materials that could be found at that point to live in. And they were always only supposed to be temporary, but they're still here, Right. So the townships are, really that's where why they began in the first place. But they're essentially like a shanty town. So often there's no running water. There'll be no, no bathrooms in quite commonly in some of the areas. And in fact, this was actually a connecting thing, is that I realised that in some of the areas they would have rows of polyjohns. So all the festival toilets that we all know and love, that's the toilets that would support some of the communities. And I hasten to add, especially from the areas that I know, across Soweto Township, much of Soweto Township isn't like that now. Right. There's been massive development, and it's more like bungalows, if you like, lots of single level buildings, if you like, rather than shanties. But in Deep Sleep, where I went, it really was extremely sort of simple setups, a lot of poverty, and it was a huge eye opener for me. And you know what? I had the most phenomenal time. It was extraordinary, and connecting with everyone. It was just so amazing. And in a way, I realised afterwards it was a bit like that festival vibe that we get. Right. It's like the site crew fires, the kind of the sense of community when you're in a temporary build somewhere. But clearly lots of poverty and, lots of difficulty living there. That night, I went back to my, posh hotel that I'd been put up in as a crew person, back to there. And my mind was blown because, of course, I'd seen these crew just on the event site, Right. I didn't realise, I knew that they came from Soweto and different surrounding areas. But to really go and see where these guys were living and, like some of them were turning up late, for example. There was a few of them were turning up late in the mornings. And I was saying, guys, we must be on time. Just we've got this huge build going on. And then realising that actually this certain ones that were maybe 20 minutes, half an hour late every morning, instead of being irritated, realising that these guys are having to get these taxi buses that aren't scheduled, that maybe 3 or 4 of them to even get to where the stadium was. Yeah. And understanding that and realising, and once I understood that, it was like, oh my God, well, congratulations, you were only 20 minutes or half an hour late, realizing just how hard it was for them to even get, from one to the other. And it was that night, literally on the 11th of June, 2010, stood there out there on my balcony, and my mind was just blown from all of it. And I just knew that there was nothing. These guys were so amazing on site. They still to this day have shown the highest level of professionalism from youth training crews that I have still ever experienced in any show I've ever done around the world now. And these guys, they needed to be connected. They needed to be connected to other crews around the world. There was nothing for young people at that point to connect internationally at that point. And also they needed some perspective because they had no idea how amazing they were, how good they were, to then connect with others. And so that night, I remember it to this day. And I just said, it needs to be youth. It needs to be production. That's what's connecting us all here. It needs to be international. And it's not a company, it's a network. It's a space where everyone can connect. And we need on-site support crews like we'd done at the World Cup, which was on-site training. So not in a classroom. We never train in a classroom. It's always live on site. So the YPN crews have always been somewhere where people could also try things out as well. So they could come and do, do a day or come and join an artist liaison crew or a different type of crew. And there's a two-way thing going on there. So it's them trying it out, but it's me trying them out as well, and it's from there you can then very easily, see who the natural leaders are.
I mean, that the crews that you've put onto the pyramid stage, production crews, lighting, what else is there? We've got the kitchens, the crew chiefs. Shout out Floyd, and it's just incredible the places that you have been able to insert people who really don't have all that much experience into the biggest. Like, I've called Glastonbury a logistical masterpiece before because it is just everything is a cog, isn't it? And everything has its place, and everything has been designed and troubleshot, whatever the expression is, over the years. Trial and error. It has been refined. And it's a lean. Well, when it's working well, and that's most of the time, isn't it? It's a lean, mean machine, and to be able to get someone on the forklift get these guys coming in and they're wearing their like rigging stuff or whatever, and I'm just like, yes, this is so cool. And you're just talking like Dennis or whatever, and he's telling me about his day working on the pyramid, putting the screen together or cabling or whatever, and I'm just like, and at the end of the day, people coming back talking about their days, what they've been up to, some glamorous, some not so glamorous, but that's the way it is. It's just been absolutely incredible. But
the Glastonbury Festival opportunities are built up of, it's been a lifetime of my history through that, which has enabled those positions to be there. And those people, we in 2019, we actually operated the largest ever festival training crew that ever occurred on a festival site anywhere. And we had over 35 crew, solid training crew across 5 arenas, right. 5 areas across Glastonbury. It was enormous. So all of those are phenomenal roles. But also the washing up roles, which very well, Andy, the working for the Eat to the Beat crew. Yeah. The reason that we took those on, because we don't do, there's no other festival anywhere at all that we do catering support crew for anywhere. And we normally wouldn't. But the reason we do it there is because it supports the pyramid crew tent, behind the pyramid stage. And that crew tent feeds the people that you're feeding, the people you're working with for a start, the Eat to the Beat crew. They're not just any old catering crew. They tour with all of the major bands all over the world. Yeah. So these guys know, as that they're incredible individuals to connect with anyway, and work on sites and arenas and everywhere. But the people you're feeding in that tent everywhere are probably the highest, level. It's the biggest, most intense level of world-class technicians. It's a unique gathering that happens every year. So it's a wonderful place to network and also be visible. It's why, as well as wearing, uniforms with the YPN high-vis crew vest, there's a real purpose there. So you can really be seen, as being part of the crew to all these people.
It really is incredible who's in those. Like I've been in there eating before, and there's Otis who used to do News Round, or you've got the Radiohead's road crew, and they're all characters. As you can tell, the road crew, because there's always one of them that's got some ratty dreadlock coming down to his ass. Do you know what I mean? And they're always the ones that you're like, oh, you're the most hardcore one.
Yeah.
You're the one who was there when they were a local band. Do you know what
That's
I mean?
right. And they don't have surnames, these people. They're called Spike and Mouse and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to thank you again, because last time we were there, I'm getting confused with my years now, because we just wrote a year off, haven't we, with 2020, and so it just gets me confused with when we were last at Glastonbury. Was it 2019, I think
2019, yeah.
And you were like, I need someone to go and work Pyramid Crew. Andy, you're going to come with me and we're going to do it. And that was fantastic. I got to roll out, I think it was Hosier's drum kit onto the Pyramid.
Yeah, that's right.
And I just had to take a moment just to stand there and take it in, because I might not drum on this stage myself, but I will just take a moment just to breathe in.
Just enjoy 100,000 people in front of you going wild.
Yeah.
And
it's a strange one. I mean, a lot of people I think will think that's a really scary thing, and it's not. It just, I mean, maybe it is for some, but for me, it felt like home. Do you know what I mean? And
I was going to say, it's your natural home, Andy. That's why I plucked you out the kitchen that day. And I said, Andy, come with me. Don't tell the others. Come with me. Quick. And we ran off straight to the back, and I threw you straight into the crew, and then suddenly you were loading in on the main stage at Pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was gassing with Janet Jackson's drummer. Just at the back, stood by the drum kit, just admiring it. And probably the biggest drum kit I've ever seen. Just so many cymbals and toms. And, and he was like, it's pretty good, huh? And I was like, yeah, what's up? And then turn out he's Janet Jackson's drummer. I was like, okay, cool. But I mean, that was a wicked day. And then we watched a bit, didn't we, with Jimmy Carr and the Killers drummer. I can't remember his name. They were hanging around. They were cool.
That's right, up in the viewing platforms. And the reason that we get such close access, again, that is because there's a long history of relationship there. Because what a lot of the YPN crew don't realise is that before the YPN crew, the tours, as you know, that I do, so you've got the crew that are actually working on the stages all the time, but then I always make sure that all the crew that are working for the catering support and are doing washing up and, the behind the stage jobs all get an opportunity to come and join one of my on-stage tours. And because it's because of my relationship with the production crew that we were able to do that, because they were never allowed before. So the YPN stage tours are the first time they've ever had or permitted certainly tours ever on the Pyramid stage and the other stage. And because I know the stage managers and all of the other guys as well, and they know they can trust me, that I can bring a small group, and we know how to move through that space. Because as you know, what most people don't realise from the front is actually what you see from the front is actually only about a quarter of the size of the actual whole stage space.
Yeah.
And behind there's this enormous, huge moving factory of moving parts, of hundreds of risers coming in, all the kit coming off the trucks at the back onto the risers, moving around, the performance is going, then the risers being pushed off, deconstructed again back on the trucks. So and it's a very high pressured and a global broadcast environment. Yeah. So if you've got, us and a couple of minions that are tripping up, the major ride, the people don't want anyone. That's why no one was allowed in there previously. Understandably, they didn't want anyone messing that around. But because we know how to do it, we coordinate very carefully. The timings that we even go up there are very carefully coordinated. And we get to go up to the viewing platforms, which are tucked inside, which you can't see from the audience, but just tucked inside the wings. and get that really special view for some of the earlier performances.
Yeah, I remember one year we were on Evis's private platform watching the bootleg Beatles.
Yeah.
And that was so good. And then someone come along and they were like, guys, Evis is coming, you're going to go.
Time to go, like, okay, that's right.
Cool, thanks very much. Do you know what I mean? And we'd leave, but in a professional way and in the right way. Right. And it's exactly. I just love it. I love those environments. I love being around all that sort of stuff. Like I said before, it's sort of like, it's a bit like Ohm. It's like Ohm.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah. So from, the history of all of the YPN crews that developed over the years, in 2018, I set up my other organisation, which is called Women Walk Together. And that basically, YPN obviously supports young people, across the production industry, and Women Walk Together obviously, supports women within the production industry. And this was set up in place, in response to partly my own experience over the years as being a woman in the production industry, and for many years being the only woman on site, whether I was, even as I sort of developed my levels of responsibility as I went along, and I'd be production managing arena shows and I'd still be the only woman on site, within the crews. So partly my own experience through that, where you have had like constant bullying, constant comments, just all the time, there was always something there. But also the more I then travelled internationally, which happened, throughout this time as well, the more I became aware of just how even harder it was for women in other countries as well, in the way that they were being treated. And there was a girl who I'd come in contact with called Mariam Mbai Bangora, who came from Guinea, West Africa, who I'd kind of connected with via YPN. And she was the first girl who had a technical qualification within her for sheet metal work. Actually, she's to create these kind of metal constructions, and ran her own company in her community. And very, very long story cut short, she ended up dying because of the struggles of being a woman in her community. And I was absolutely devastated, because I had a picture of her up on my wall at my office for ages. I'd always really proudly talk about her to so many people. And really that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And when I heard that she'd passed away, I was so devastated. And I just, just something inside me is saying, look, this is enough, enough, actually, to all of it. I've been working in this industry for 20 years now, and still all the time, even when I produced the Olympic, the London Olympic torch relay concerts, and even, up at these huge iconic events that I'm directing, producing, show calling, etc., still experiencing, sort of prejudice, if you like, around big women. And it was just like, enough. So in 2018, it marked 100 years of Nelson Mandela anniversary that year. And the 18th of July, which is International Mandela Day, which was his birthday, there was all of these many celebrations going on around that. And I had been working with a group that Mandela set up leading up to that, called the Elders. It's a group of ex-retired, so to speak, world leaders and, peacemakers, that work behind the scenes together to try and, support where there's conflict, and to help change humanitarian, situations around the world. And I did an event for them in 2017, the year beforehand. It was a year campaign. It was their 10-year campaign anniversary, an event in Cape Town where we had a walk and a concert in the Cape Town Convention Centre, which featured acts like Hugh Masekela. And after that, he died, in fact. So it was one of the last performances, on that show that I produced for them. And they had this year-long campaign called the Walk Together campaign, which was all about supporting inspirational, as they called it, sparks of hope around the world. So it was all about shining a light on inspirational communities, all sorts of different, individuals, groups around the world over that year leading up to the 100 years celebration. And I found out about Mariam through that year, having done that, event. And so we never planned anything big. I literally started from that thought of like, we must do something. And instead of talking about it, let's actually do it. Let's just demonstrate once and for all, let's not beg and can we please work on event sites and honestly we're all really good as women, and blah, blah, blah. Let's just do it. End of conversation, done, So I spoke to some friends around the world in different communities that I knew. And one by one, they all joined in, said, yeah, no, we want to do something. We want to do something. And we all contributing together. Basically, that was the launch of Women Walk Together on the 18th of July in 2018. And we had 5 female-led events, not big fancy ones, but frontline communities around the world that happened in South Africa, in Guinea. Well, there was a celebration where Mariam's family came from in her village. In the UK, we had an event in the 100 Club in Oxford Street in London. And we had an event in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and also an event in India, in Bangalore. And we had 5 events, and the anchor event was in South Africa. So I went out to South Africa about 6 weeks beforehand and went out to work in the townships, which I have done, throughout these last 10 years, and to reach out to female communities, female crew who wanted to join in. And so we ran it, and I ran it from South Africa, and we connected to all of those events on the day, and we did a global live stream, which I ran from South Africa, and did the first ever global female production showcase celebrating, Mandela.
Yeah.
And so that was the whole launch to a new chapter, if you like. And it was along the way that I, met many different people. And one of them was Shanti Annan, who is the daughter-in-law of Kofi Annan, who also was leading walks, the Mandela Mile walks, also around that 100-year anniversary. And essentially for the last 2 years, we kind of joined forces, and Women Walk Together joined to support Mandela Mile, and essentially ran a live stream, so it was produced, the live stream was produced and facilitated by Women Walk Together for Mandela Mile. And we had a version which we did in 2019. And then, of course, as we went into 2020, we were going to have I just had all of the approvals signed off to do a big live event in Trafalgar Square. So that was what was supposed to happen, last July. And of course, then the lockdown happened. So through that, instead, because we couldn't get into studios or anywhere online, I was, and I was in isolation here in Frome like the rest of us. But I had my little sound recording unit here, which we're partly using right now. And it was about using what you got from where you were, situation. And so basically I started, because I've traveled all over the world already. I've connected to all of these places already. I'm actually very used to working remotely, so that's something that was very natural to come to me. And I also, when I'm here, I've already always worked from home. I haven't worked in an office for a long time. So in some senses, I was already set up for working in this way, as everybody had to go online. And I started to do my first podcast interviews, in April, when we had no other way of doing anything. I said, well, shall I at least, I could interview you at least, and we could just put that out, and see where it went. And so in a nutshell, I ended up doing more and more of these interviews with different community leaders, all sorts of different ages. And I also worked with the Mandela Mile Leadership Program, which was a community of young emerging leaders from 21 countries around the world who all were, you know, starting up or pioneering some sort of local initiative, you know, from wherever they were. They're all different, but that was their connecting situation. And I then basically created this training, this empowerment training, which I'm now calling it, of using the production skills that we had before, so the recording and the, you know, the sound engineering and, you know, the video editing and all of that, but using it in a way to benefit and to support the community. So with the training that I did with the leaders, with the leadership program, I developed a 3-part training, which was how do I speak, how do I help others to speak, and how do we all speak together? And it was very, very basic, you know, because many of the individuals I was working with lived in places where they had no mains power, for example, or access to a notepad and a pen in some cases, you know. So it was a real range of environments and resources that were available in those environments. So how do I speak was based around teaching how to record a video message, you know, and just the best way to, and it wasn't about learning fancy kit. It was about using what you had in the best way you could. So I was teaching stuff like, you know, learning where is your microphone on your phone? Where is the mic? You know, have that awareness of when you are speaking, so that you can, you know, realize that actually a close-up is better than having it further away in terms of capturing your voice, for example. Yeah. Learning about background noise, you know, the balance of that, but also the way that background noise can tell a whole story about where you are, you know, and everything that can communicate. And how to then how to then share that message online, you know, how to amplify the voice, the message that you're trying to say out there. And then the how to help others speak was all about interview training. Right. So how to be interviewed, you know, and how to interview others, how to give someone else a platform to share their message. Yeah. And then, you know, how do we all speak together was around how do you present as a community of many people, but present as one voice together? What do we as a community believe, or what do we want to say, or what are our goals, or what do we need, you know, for example? So what was extraordinary about that was I was initially training them because on a very practical level, because, you know, they were going to be part of the global live stream, you know, that I was running on Mandela Day. So it was like, you know, aid and a stage by stage support so that they could come and be part of that and learn about, you know, what they needed to do, what to expect, and how to present themselves as part of the global live stream. But what really happened along the way was this extraordinary journey of, whilst we're learning the basic equipment and the practical side, but this journey of real self-inquiry that really happened. So we had kind of 2 levels of training that were opening up. You know, first the practical, how do you shoot it? And, you know, and I was, you know, I realized that pretty much everyone I talked to, no matter where they were, everyone could get hold of a washing line, right? Everyone could get hold of a washing line wherever you are. Right. And you could at least put some sort of fabric over it. It could be a bed sheet or, you know, or anything
You create
to create a background, or also like an acoustic, you know, a soft surface. Yes. If you're in acoustically hard rooms and you were getting echoing, you know, stuff like that. So you had these things going on, but there's the self-inquiry that I was teaching around that was actually quite extraordinary journey to go on. Right. So it came back to, who am I? Yeah. What is it that I even want to say? Yeah. And who is it I'm trying to say it to? And why am I trying to say it? You know, really going back to that. And the same thing with interviews. You know, what am I asking? Why am I asking these questions? Yeah. What it is that I'm trying to find here. And really, you know, what are we sharing here? What do we need? And I just saw a directly immediate benefit that happened. It was extraordinary through this training, where people were literally finding their voice, you know, and you know what it's like when you've thought about something for a long time, maybe, and you might have talked to someone about it. But actually saying it, literally vocalizing it for the first time, vocalizing who you are for the first time, is actually quite it's a very powerful process to go through.
Yeah. I get this a lot with this podcast, is the nature of it, because they tend to be quite biographical, and they seem to, a lot of them have an arc of a person's life. Sometimes after the podcast, you can see that they're buzzed from it. They have a buzz from it. And I've had people I've interviewed say, "Hey man, I really needed that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that talking about what I'd done in my life and what I'd achieved and where I was going really helped me realign with myself, and especially last year, to keep me motivated, and to remind myself that I actually do get stuff done, and I'm valuable, and I'm good at what I do." And then other times the podcast ends up, after the podcast, it almost feels, and this isn't this is, I don't mean this in a negative way, sometimes it feels like a counseling session. People continue to share things with me sometimes after the microphones are off, because they've been put into this calm, relaxed situation where the conversation can go anywhere they want it to, and they're talking about themselves. And sometimes I ask quite prying questions. I try to do it with respect, but sometimes I will ask some tough questions that will, like you said, cause a little bit of inward thinking, and to looking at themselves. And yes, I totally get what you're saying there. Totally. It's been a real powerful thing.
Absolutely. And it's having that sense of acknowledgement. It's like giving someone really a space where you really are listening to what they say. And it's extraordinary how many people in the world just don't get that on a daily basis in their lives, or they're so busy, looking after everybody else or doing whatever they're doing and stuff. But that moment where really someone is literally there for you, and respectfully holding that space for you to really, hear what you have to say, is so powerful. So the power of interviews, of giving people that platform, is, you can never underestimate that, and how it can change people's lives.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, you shared with me an interview you did with someone very special who inspired me greatly and moved me whose spirit actually kind of moved me a couple of days ago. Tell us about. Let's wrap up with this, because we've been going quite a while now. So let's wrap up with this story, because although there is, I don't want to say tragedy, although there's hardship in this story, ultimately it's an example of the human spirit prevailing, isn't it? And I it's such a lush story. I want you to tell me again, and tell the listeners again, about this phone interview that you conducted throughout the night via voice notes. Just set that one up for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this really does bring us up to the present now, because now moving forward, into 2021, I'm now fully focused on Women Walk Together and YPN. So, all the other projects I've taken a step back from, and now it's really about focusing on the crews, because as you know, the production crews worldwide really have been suffering and are suffering, and need that inspiration right now. And so this person, this is an incredibly special girl called, her full name is Amukalani Kosa, but I know we call her Amu. And Amu and I are now working together, on this empowerment training moving forward. But I met Amu, very briefly in 2018. So in that original connection in Cliptown and in Soweto Township, to pull together the first teams for the Women Walk Together Global Showcase, was when I first met her. And Amu she's grown up in Cliptown in Soweto Township. It's, like I say, lots of Soweto is not what people might imagine at all, I would say. It's far more developed and, far more developed than people might think. But Cliptown is really one of the very poorest parts of that. So this really is, corrugated iron shacks. It's no mains power, so people are taking power from the railway lines, with all sorts of dangerous, connotations there. There's no running water. It's a very hard environment. And since the pandemic hit, there's, over the last, even before that, I would say, they'd had lots of gangs move into the area that really there was terrible gang fights going on. And there was a lot of drugs as well around that. So there was like shooting, stabbings, literally imagine how terrifying that is. That as soon as it turns dark, it's just horrific, so incredibly dangerous, every single night being there. And as the pandemic hit, it's just intensified, and right now you can't imagine how it's like a war zone, really is, living there. And Amu we were on connecting because the network's so bad, actually for almost a year and a half, we've been communicating via voice notes for nearly a year and a half because you can't get where she was, you couldn't get enough signal to get a decent, even a WhatsApp call, conversation time. So we were sort of used to that in a way anyway. And there was one night, through the lockdown last year where everything intensified and I was on communication to her and she basically was pretty much cowering in her bed, listening to gunshots flying past her shack. Her family had to evacuate. People were evacuating out of the area. And, quite honestly, I didn't know whether, she was going to make it through the night. It was just absolutely horrific. And I'd started doing the podcast interviews, by that point. And we'd already talked about doing an interview, together. And her representing as a Women Walk Together. She is the Women Walk Together South African, production crew chief, on the ground there. So we were going to do a live report, with her. And this night was getting so terrible. All I could do was just to keep being with her, just keep being live on the other end, keep sending messages, because essentially she was just totally on her own, and having to survive through this night. And, I was thinking, well, as soon as it's daylight again, she couldn't move at all whilst it was dark. But whilst it was daylight, we would make moves to evacuate her out. And so it was under these conditions, I said to her, partly to sort of give her something to do, or give us something to do, something to focus on whilst you're kind of waiting out the night, really. And I said, let's record an interview together. Let's do that. And so we just did it bit by bit, where I would record a question on a voice note, one question per voice note, and she would listen and then record an answer per voice note. And, sent them all over. And essentially we pieced them all together. So again, this is the YPN audio army working with me to piece these all together to create this interview. And it was really Amu's message to the world, about who she was, who she is, what was really going on, and her message to the world. And as you know, it absolutely floored me, what she actually said, being in the middle of that, being in the middle of gunfire, in the middle of absolute poverty, of where she was, brought such an incredible message of love, of saying she wants everyone to know themselves, she wants everyone to connect and to support. In the middle of that, just blew my mind. And I'm happy to say that we did, support in evacuating her out, and we've continued to support and work with her. So Amu and I talk every day, and we're now working with another one of the original YPN World Cup pioneers, Wiseman, an amazing, now award-winning documentary maker, and the three of us are now working with local communities across South Africa to continue this empowerment training and the interviews.
Yeah, it just... Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of The Giant Pod with me, Andy Wrintmore. That was my guest, Rachel Haughey. If you want to find out more about Women Walk Together, the Youth Production Network, or maybe any other things that may have been mentioned that I may have missed in this podcast, then you will find those in the show notes descriptions. Make sure you like, subscribe, and review this podcast if you can. It really, really helps us out, really helps us grow. Please tell a friend, tell one friend if you can. That would be great. If you want to follow this show on Instagram, it is at The Giant Pod. I'm pretty sure that's the same for the Twitter as well. And if you want to follow my Instagram, it is Andy_S1S. From one production manager to another this week, this show was produced by Harry Williams. We will see you next week on The Giant Pod. Thanks very much.